But anyway, good afternoon, colleagues. I hope we all had very fruitful discussions and engagements during the presentations. The next stage involves just a very brief report book. If the session chairs, if you can limit your contributions to 2 to 3 minutes, then that will also keep us in time for other things. And if you may allow me to mute those that will go on and on and on. I'm joking, I won't do that. But the key thing is that let's try and stick to 2 to 3 minutes in terms of feedback, so that if there are others that also want to chime in, then they can do that. Shahid, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, you see, you give people power, then they want to abuse it, you know. Starting to order people around about how they can only have 2 minutes, so on. Okay, so I'm just going to report back from a morning session where we talked essentially about liberation songs and music, and specifically Swahili music. We talked around, I guess, a couple of important points. What is the influence of music? What are the influences on music? And music as a key component of social change, for better or worse. Speaking about liberation songs, particularly with reference to South Africa, this was important, a large degree of contextualization with regard to liberation struggles. One of the important points that came out was the influence of Christian hymns on liberation songs. But one of the points made was it's not so much about the origin of the influence, but what is the importance and the significance of these liberation songs in a context where there is oppression, lack of human rights, and injustice. With regard to the Swahili music, again, there's the strong sense of Arab or Islamic influence. But as we got to understand Swahili music, again with the afternoon session, there are multiple genres of such music with multiple sets of influences coming from all parts of the world, specifically from the Indian subcontinent, from Arabia, from North Africa, from within the continent, such as from the Congo, from as far afield as Cuba. And so, I guess the important point was that this music strands a number of different categories of where it is played and when it is played. Sacred music, ritual music, weddings. And important in that is that the music has meaning. It has shared meanings, and the way in which people understand it depends, again, on where they are situated. So it might evoke emotional, reflective resonances. It might send messages, but it is also a commentary on social, political issues, morality issues. And so I'll leave it there, because there's much more and very important points that are made, but I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll be extending my 2 minutes. Thanks.
No. We can revisit some of these issues, but yeah, there is that saying which says that power is only bad when you don't have it. Edward Denison.
Thank you, boss. I was just texting you about the next session, which I'm sure you will brief everybody on after my brief summary. So we had a really interesting discussion this morning. The title of the session was Urban Heritage, Colonialism and Modernity. Corina Del Bianco's title was Imagining New Forms of Urban Development Through the Enhancement of the Local Culture of Living, based on a case study in Pemba in Mozambique. And Morietta Stewart presented Counter Mapping Heritage, Memory and Significance in Places of Racialized Land Dispossession, the case of Lower Claremont in Cape Town. They were really complementary pieces of work, wonderful studies, and they elicited very extensive discussion afterwards. So forgive me if I haven't captured that discussion fully, and please do chip in if there's something I've left out. But what came up, I think, as headlines were the question of what is significance when we talk about heritage, significance or value, and who gets to decide what is significant, or what comprises significance, sort of official histories and official narratives against unofficial or new types of narratives. Both presentations spoke very strongly of their methodological approaches, which were both outstanding, and aimed at countering dominant or sort of master narratives. And in both cases, well, one dealt with counter mapping and the other one typological studies. So the importance of methodology was a particular highlight. Then the question was raised, well, what or who are we countering? Which is obviously a central question to the broader MoHoA initiative. More specifically, and this has come up again in previous discussions, the need to dissolve the rural and the urban. These are probably unhelpful categorizations, and that I think maybe can be discussed in the next session on the Cape Town document. It's come up a lot. Just going back to methodologies, walking or the movement through space as a tool for resistance and inclusive practices. It was really powerful how Morietta spoke about her methods of using walking. And I think particularly in this COVID or recent COVID past and possible future, the need for urban walking is something that we can activate as a research tool, as a methodological tool, which is very effective. Both presentations spoke very strongly about the contribution of the local. The local and the global have come up as a topic, obviously, within MoHoA more broadly, but that research situated in the local was very strongly felt. The use of new technologies to supplement the methodologies they used, so the use of digital apps and mapping, new methods of mapping and recording, the exploitation of these digital technologies, and the importance, finally, of the multi or transdisciplinary approaches. Speaking as an architectural historian myself and chairing the session, it made me realize just how, not for the first time, how deficient our historiographical methods are, and what they've led to in sort of this emphasis of the building being an artifact or monument or product, rather than a process or one component of a much larger sort of socioeconomic and cultural process that deals with space and place and not just that material artifact. So thank you. I'll leave it there. If anyone else wants to add anything, please do.
Thanks so much, Edward. Thomas, you might also want to summarize for that session which Philippa was chairing, and the one in the afternoon. If you can combine that, then I will add an extra half a second.
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon again, everyone. I had the pleasure of ending up chairing 2 sessions that shared a title, pun intended. Also, the title was Whose Shared Heritage? And for a total of 7 presentations, and a few topics came coming back. And I think particularly this morning's presentations centered quite strongly issues of power, and that were interesting in terms of how does heritage contribute to the notions of power, and how can it be understood as possibly being the face of it, and at the same time, how can it be shared or reappropriated, and how can it hold a transformative and subversive potential. And those presentations ranged, from looking at cases in South Africa or Mozambique, and so I think that was really or across indeed other countries in the African continent. This afternoon's 4 presentations, which we just closed here in the plenary venue, added the dimension of bricolage and tectonics and material tectonics. And I think Edward has just spoke to that partly, but I think it was interesting in terms of shifting the scale of the lens at which one looks at it, and possibly then bringing it in the issue of authorship, right? And I think just before I hand it over to you in terms of chairing this plenary, there was an ongoing Q&A session in terms of what is authentic, and so what is the original versus material artifact, and how can that be preserved, or why should that be preserved and understood? And lastly, pointing though to, last but not least, really sort of the question of the disciplinary angle. And there was some thought-provoking questions this morning in terms of, is the question of the architect as the author a valid one, and how can one unpack that, given that the architect ends up being mostly credited and recognized, versus where are the other laborers that produce the artifacts, and what is, and more ontologically, how does academia as the place which is hosting this conversation open up rather than being a narrow place of conversation? There's more, but I'm sure I'm not doing full justice, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Who is next? David Stell, is he in this room? Or who chaired that session, Performance and Orality as Contemporary slash
That's me. That's me.
Okay, you now have a new name by the name of David. The floor is yours.
I swapped with him.
Over to you,
Anyway,
Mike.
Well, we were very, very small, intense group, and it was based on the Swahili part with the Heritage Hub, and essentially this was, we would put it in the box of intangible heritage. But we came up with the idea, first of all, which was then spoken about, that the traditional arts were owned by the community, and the modern is owned by the individual, by the composer and the artist. And perhaps, therefore, there's room to rethink, therefore, this idea, not of just legal ownership, but ownership about what this is taking place. The music and the arts are really managing dramatic changes, traditional music with new instruments, new art forms and messages, and the merging of texts and messages for political and social ends. So therefore, we then get hybrid structures or actual activities being hijacked. And the arts does not worry about it. So the other part of it is then, is the intangible as defined is essentially a break. There's intangible and tangible. And we spend all the time trying to merge them together, yet nobody's doing anything about it. So how can the intangible engage the senses, and therefore, and how they can help us to create spirit and feeling. In other words, we have our buildings, but without people, without spirit and feeling, without the arts, they're not going to exist. So we speak about inspiration to achieve aspiration. The next question is then, how do we integrate tangible, intangible music and arts in place, public squares, public buildings, events? And in fact, we said that the Swahili part is the Heritage Hub must be now strengthened so as to be able to say exactly how, in fact, we could have this, this exchange. And the last point really is that music and art does not see the colonialism as an issue or as a threat, because they were created on eye-level interchange, allowing for new syncretistic identities. And this is what was happening. The music of the Shahid actually took on board from Egypt, from India, from Islam, from all these places, and was quite happy to do it. So I think that the issue really is a state of mind. And that's why I think the document UCT, or the Cape Town document for modern heritage, is essentially to change the global state of mind. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Laura Robinson, how are you? Over to you.
Thank you, Shadreck. I chaired the session, the second session on urban heritage, colonialism and modernity this afternoon. We only had 2 presentations due to the fact that we couldn't contact or couldn't find the third presenter. So we didn't get the presentation by Rim Peluwazi on expression of liberation movements through modern architecture in Africa, subtitle Afro-Brazilian and Neo-Moorish Liberation Architectures, which is a pity. It would have been very interesting. But we had a very good session indeed, and we were able to spend a bit more time in discussion, which was always nice. And we started off with the Swahili Pot video and a short introduction to what Swahili Pot is and what it does from Arafat Musaka. And the video was produced, and we had Fatma Twahia, who joined us at the end, talking about Swahili architecture, fusion of the traditional and modernity, in which a number of students from the University of Technology had been looking at examples of coastal buildings along the Kenyan coast, and exploring whether those kind of buildings actually fitted in with the notion of modernity. And it was interesting, some of the findings related to the use of contemporary or modern fabric or building methods, but using stylistic designs that were familiar to and resonated with local communities, which was considered by the group to be an interpretation of modernity. And I think it was a bit short and rushed, but it was a very interesting discussion. And then the second presentation we had, which was also fascinating and engendered quite a lot of debate, was a conversation between presenters Naomi Rue and Deirdre Prince-Solani, titled Urban Heritage for Transformative Futures, Architecture, Intangible Heritage and Belonging in Cape Town. And it explored very broadly the issues relating to heritage, memory and spatial justice, particularly in the South African example, obviously with the apartheid planning system. And one of the interesting things that came up, that spatial justice is quite difficult to define, but it is easier to define through its absence, and using the examples of the urban centers and the peripheral communities that we find so frequently, particularly clearly in Cape Town. We looked at radical spatial transformation and the disruption to communities caused by our apartheid planning system and the system of forced removals, and the impact that it had on the interpretation of heritage as it relates, in management terms, mostly to building fabric. But if you're looking at the social significance, the social significance of place is so much richer and deeper. And that is lacking in the formal management assessment processes existing within our legislation in South Africa. And we need to try and push for a more inclusive understanding of social significance within the built environment in particular. There were some very interesting discussions on what we call a fraught and fractured heritage. I'm using quotes, which I found resonating, and heritage activism, particularly within communities and heritage practitioners who are working outside the formal mainstream, let's put it that way. The idea that intangible heritage can be the key to unlocking some of the disjunctures that we find ourselves faced with. as I mentioned earlier, we thought about heritage being managed in terms of its materiality, which is strongly embedded within our national legislation, and also thought about the fact that living heritage is not considered or even understood by many planning authorities, if any authorities at all. The other important question is who holds the archive of memory and the custodians thereof, because there's a great danger in highlighting misrepresentation of values depending on who is holding that memory, that archive of memory. And then just to conclude very briefly, a wonderful question that was posed by Deirdre at the end, which I think is very relevant to us, is what do belonging and identity mean in the modern heritage of Africa, particularly in the urban sense? So there's some quite deep thinking that we need to do there. Thank you, Shadreck.
Thanks. And that's also a question that resonates with those points that Achille Mbembe made during his keynote address during the conceptualization workshop, the issue of belonging. And so it's great that it is also being raised here. Philippa, do you want to come in for half a second?
Not particularly, Professor. I've just arrived. Give me a minute, yes, to.
No, that's fine. I just saw that you were logged in, so just to be fair in terms of our time allocation. Okay, thanks.
I did have technical issues, but Thomas did cover for me. I don't know if he's.
Yes, he did cover. He also summarized the session, but that was just myself abusing my position to give you an opportunity to also say something if you wanted to.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, so that you won't say in Africa there's no democracy. But anyway, we have two options here. The first one is to take a short comfort break for maybe 5 minutes and then regroup and do discuss the draft Cape Town document, or to continue and allow for more time. The instruction that I was given was that perhaps a 5 to 10 minute comfort break might make sense, just to stretch a little bit. And then we come back and start with the Cape Town document. So see you in 10 minutes, which is 15:40 your time.
Pamba mobali wana ye moko alingi ngai mingi na mokilo yo mwasi ya kobenga mobali te ye moko ayaki na ndako na ngai na yambiye ya kobenga mobali te ye mokwa yaki na ndako na ngai na yambiye bande kwa tatika kofinga ngai nazali na likambo te o mama ye mokwa mipesi nyonso na ngai foti yanga te ya ye moko soko zali na likambo motema nzela ya biro ezali pamba mama kasi ya kodongola ngai na nzela te likambo nalingi te o sokozali na likambo motema nzela ya bino ezali pamba mama kasi ya kodongola nga na nzela elikambo nalingi te o eba oh mama yangana yo bane kwa tadi Natalia pambadi mami bane kwa tadi
Matin, à l'instant du réveil, viens tendrement poser des perles de rosée sur la nature en fleurs, chère à mon cœur. Le ciel a choisi mon pays pour faire un nouveau paradis au loin des torrents dans un éternel printemps pour les amants. Chante mon cœur la chanson du matin dans la joie de la vie qui revient. Matin, fait lever le soleil. Matin, à l'instant du réveil. Mais dans le cœur battant, c'est le que j'attends, en tout rayon d'amour, touché à mon cœur, afin que son premier soupir réponde à mon dernier désir. Et chaque baiser perdu ne revient plus. Chante, chante mon cœur dans la splendeur du jour, fais lever le soleil de l'aurore.
Kite na mokili obali kaka se yo moko yo zali na posa ya mbongo yo sala na yango biso bilingi yo banza kite na mokili obali kaka se yo moko yo zali na posa ya mbongo yo sala na yango biso bilingi yo. Yo banza kite na ya mokili obali kaka se yo moko yozali na posa ya mongo yosala na yango biso bilingi yo oh mayele mayo maleki mwasi kitoko na yo lokola sanza moninga yonde moto suka mabeboye yoleli biso mbongo utakala maleki mwasi kitoko na yo lokola sanza moninga yonde moto suka mabeboye yoleli biso mbongo utakala African jazz, Africa yabana kinwaye, tukobola African jazz, ingomba ya bilengeo, Africa bimana miso ya bato, bangu na peba ina yoe, Africa bola ngombi, ande ko peba bina. Bimana miso ya bato bangu na peba ina yoe Afrika bolango mpie ande ko peba bina epito metrese joga ye bongoe samba ekumbana usmane kumbana arosa gitara nyata manie samba ekumbana usmane kumbana onikie panzala meteo gitara oro samba ekumbana.
Hello and welcome back. What we will be doing in this session, which is approximately 1 hour long, is to discuss the draft of the Cape Town document. But what we thought of doing is sharing it on the screen. So Mike Tana will be sharing it on the screen, and then we will be going through the main points, and people on the floor can add comments and make suggestions. So what we will try and do is just to make notes so that we can use that. I'm seeing some messages here that Mike might not be on this call right now. I'm not so sure, Edward, as co-pilot, are you able to share, or are you able to share your screen and so that our colleagues can see? But the main reason for doing that, for taking that approach, is we felt that we needed to be inclusive and to ensure that the inputs from all of us on this call is also reflected onto the document. And as was mentioned yesterday, we are extremely grateful to Laura Robinson and Edward Dennison for taking this draft this far, but also obviously acknowledging the inputs that were also made by others. Mike, I see Mike Turner is back. Mike, are you in a position to share the document?
Yes, yes, yes. I'm just share screen.
I should also note that for those of you that are following the timetable, we won't be having the session with Ishanlosen after this session because it was recorded and played earlier on today. So we might have a little bit of extra time for this session, and then we'll have a break before the final session.
Okay. Is it quite important to discuss these preliminaries, or we just go on to the main points? What is the general feeling?
I think the main points are the most vital. Unless anyone, please feel free, anyone in the room, to raise a hand, turn your mic straight on and jump in if there's anything that you want to contribute.
Something that is missing, something that requires strengthening, something that needs to be removed, all of that.
And just to reiterate or repeat from yesterday, the draft that was sent to everybody contains a bibliography which wouldn't be in the final document. It's the very start of a compilation of materials that we want you all to add to. So if there's any reading materials from your courses that you've done yourself that you think are a good contribution to this endeavor, please send us that so we can build up a really comprehensive bibliography. So what you see at the back there is just the start of that compilation. And as we also mentioned yesterday, the structure of this is in the spirit of the NARA document. So we have this preamble, and so please feel free to add to that now. But the most important part is the next stage. Olga, sorry, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure about this UN Sustainable Development Goals. First of all, because I see this document as a future-oriented, so something that, like NARA document, will probably still be valid in like 20 years. And the Sustainable Development Goals, although I kind of understand why it is mentioned as a, the key framework at the moment, global framework. But first of all, it expires in 9 years. So then there probably will be some other, we had Millennium Development Goals. Now we have sustainable. In 9 years, we're going to have something else. And also because it actually introduces a very particular frame or very particular conceptualization what development is. And I think that as much as we can, we should be staying away or really trying to be open enough, because then the first question that I would ask is this how you conceptualize or define development? This the way that UN does. So hence my worry about putting UN Sustainable Development Goals there. Thank you.
Great point. Thanks, Olga. So Mike, thank you for highlighting all of these as we go through. If anyone has made copious notes, please do send us the copies of your own Cape Town documents as well, and we'll compile them all after the conference. Shahid.
Yeah, there was a meta paragraph that we wanted to put up. Do we do that now, or do you want to put it?
Could we do that at the end? Or after we've been through the notes on the next page?
Yeah. Okay, great. Just wanted to know.
Olga, is that a phantom hand or a new one?
No, sorry, I had another well, not issue really, but the Africa We Want Agenda 2063. We are pinpointing aspiration 5, and as Mike Turner also already mentioned during today's session, that it's not really just aspiration 5. I think that we can actually speak here about Agenda 2063 as a whole, because we mentioned youth, women, which as far as I remember is aspiration 7. And to be honest, culture actually transpires through all of those aspirations, because you cannot have sustainable development without culture. You cannot have peace without considering culture. So I would just leave it personally as Agenda 2063, because it is a continental project, without even mentioning that just one aspiration speaks to culture.
Thank you. Shahid.
Yeah, when it comes to this UN Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, in general, I agree that what we define as development will change again in 20 years' time or 30 years' time. I mean, the development goals of the 1960s are clearly not the same development goals that we have now. But on the other hand, I understand sustainable development in and of itself is not a problem. The problem is how we interpret sustainable development. I mean, sustainable development for China is quite different from what it might mean for the United States. And in turn, quite different for what we might mean in an African context. So I'm always in two minds about this, because in order for this kind of document to get a hearing, you also need to have these kinds of UN type speak documents in such a document. And I think in strategic terms, it would make sense to talk about and mention it without going into specifics. Thanks.
But that's also part of the genealogy. Think of the 1992 Rio Declaration on sustainability, and then how that evolved into the MDGs. And now in terms of the SDGs, which are also influencing the Agenda 2063. So the part of this, as you rightly pointed out, is also to respond to our time and also thinking about the future. And with the realization that for an organization like UNESCO, for example, SDGs is part of their language, it's part of their DNA. So there is also need to be alert to that. I'm not saying that should not be critiqued. That should be, by all means. The key question is, where do we critique that? In a document like this, or elsewhere here, we just state that we are acknowledging it. Sorry, Ola, are you just leaving now, or do you want us to engage with your question before you leave?
Not really. I mean, I put it into the side box. It's a specific point. But I will catch up later. So I just think, add it to the deliberations, I guess. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. We will, or maybe let's action it before we move to those. If you should think that's a good move, Edward. So this is just point number 2, ruptures and continuities. Point, or if you can just add, Mike, maybe you can add comment. And yeah, okay, fantastic.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, then we can move back to where we were, and then move down. Mike, can we go back to high up there where we? Yes, the first. Are we happy here, or we need to move down the document?
Again, at the risk of repeating ourselves, for those of you that haven't maybe heard this in previous discussions and workshops, it was very clear that we needed to in the preamble, speak specifically to the experiences now and of this conference in Cape Town, and the contribution that all the colleagues that are leading up to this conference and at this conference have played a role in and acknowledging that. But the next stages are speaking to a much more global frame, which is something, as we're just discussing about language and the structures, that it's the expectation of UNESCO. This is a global document applicable globally. And so we've taken out any specific reference to place or space in the latter part, from page 2 onwards, if anyone was wondering why there is that difference.
Shahid, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Old hand.
We have a question from Nick. What's the asset of South Africa? Would you like to expand on that, Nick?
Hi, thank you. Actually, maybe I missed the on the top one, the item 4. Yeah, that one. Emphasize a strong cultural identity and common heritage values and ethics. But to me, it starts from here, meaning that everything is significance from physical and social elements. This is with thoughts that this will shape the unique, distinctive, and appreciated aspect of the place, wherever place. Is it the building, the memorial, whatever place within the historic cities, such as in South Africa. This will be the big impact on city, sites, and environment. But to me, just asking, why this one have to delete? That's it. Because we start from the history, sense of place. Sorry, what we call that? Because sense of place has multiple meaning as an experiential phenomenon of a site's unique and distinctive character and historical context. I just give them talk about Kota Baru, Kelantan, Malaysia. So under ICOMOS Malaysia, you can browse under FB last Saturday. Okay, so from there I'm sharing just a little bit in general what is regarding the royal aristocrat enclave. So to me, what I mentioned here, we must or should maintain this the emphasize strong cultural identity. Otherwise, from where? From where? That's why I'm asking you, what is the asset of South Africa? Like Kota Baru, Kelantan, Malaysia, what is the asset? But personally, every single place have their strong asset. Like Kelantan, under aristocrat enclave, there is a nice roof in Kelantan from Thailand, so-called Singora. Have you heard about Singora? So very beauty material about the roof itself. That's the asset for my hometown, Kelantan, and of course Malaysia. So again, I'm asking, what is the asset of South Africa? If maybe from the presentation, I can see so many beauty and unique that as explained by the speakers earlier, 2 or 3 speakers. I remember. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. That's a very interesting contribution. One of the issues that we had to consider was to say, if a document is going to be short, concise, and speak to the global, then that also meant that the case studies and the particular. So we sacrifice the detail and the particular just for the bigger picture. But we also anticipate that we can have annexes as different case studies if that is necessary, which speaks to the point that Mohammed was making during his talk, that there will be those expert meetings and so on. So those are the people that, and as you mentioned, the presentations that were given today and yesterday, they have rich examples of the diversities of expressions of what one might call modern heritage, from the performance arts in Mombasa to the masquerades in West Africa, to those tall buildings and so on. But here the general thrust was to go for those general points that will have a sort of a global appeal. And just to say that Nolene Murray has sent a message saying that she has a bibliography that she is willing to share with us, but she will do that tomorrow. So that's the message that she sent.
Thanks, Shadreck. Can I just add, thanks, Nick, so much for that contribution. It's really, really
Thank you.
valuable. That crossing out, was that a response to the removal of Agenda 5, in which case, could we not just reword it to say which includes an emphasis on strong cultural identity, if strong cultural identity is in Article 5 of the Agenda 2063? Is that my correct interpretation?
Yeah, it is that is the text of 5.
So can we just say which includes, and then we're making reference to Article 5 without actually highlighting only Article 5? Would that satisfy it? And then we can keep those 3 components in that Nick has highlighted as being important. Olga, would that be okay with you in your comment about Article 5?
Yeah, so we can, I mean, there are always issues, you know. For example, a lot of people actually question what is common heritage, you know, what are shared values? Are they really shared? So, but there's always critique of everything. So we have to stop somewhere.
Can I interrupt? Sorry,
Absolutely. Please.
From my just a small part only here, in my own words. Actually, there are the contents that pertaining to their unique of the site location, wherever sites, South Africa, wherever location within a precise area with respect to the wherever setting, the place setting. And of course, the environment, the ambience and environment and economics important. That's my short and precise. Thank you so much.
I'm reminded of Professor Beo Amole's comments this morning about us not getting too bogged down in the terminology and the detail. As Olga says, that we can always contest and critique what we're saying. At some point, we have to agree on certain terminologies to move on. But thanks.
If I may just throw one more thought.
Yeah.
What I mean in here is that I think that the most important thing is that we are that the document has integrity. So what we say in the beginning has to somehow be aligned with what we say later. So later we actually speak about plurality. Whereas in here we say strong cultural identity. Does the continent, the whole continent, has one cultural identity? Can we really speak about common heritage, for the whole continent, where we actually emphasize everywhere that we're speaking about pluriversality? So that's my point, really. We're speaking about heritages, cultures, and not one identity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
This is literally the exact wording of 5. In an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values and ethics. That is the quote. So we can change that, but that's where it came from.
I mean, as it reads there, as Olga points out, our cultural identity is singular and continental, whereas the others are plural. Could we not just say cultural identities? And
if I could say
Shahid,
something, yeah, I'm more inclined to talk about shared heritage values and ethics, because I mean, what is clear to me is that, I mean, what is shared is not always equal, and that for me has come out in several of the sessions that I've chaired. whether this is Swahili music, which clearly has multiple influences, but the actual content of it is not shared equally. It's shared in different dimensions. And what is important is that the shared comes out of an entanglement or not even a complementary. It comes out of what I think is an encounter. And that's what's important about, instead of saying common, you could say shared. I agree with cultural identities because, I mean, there's no such thing as one cultural identity. And it speaks to this idea about plural universities and multiple and contextual modernities rather than one single thing.
And it actually speaks to the whole session that we had today on whose heritage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Alisa, you had your hand up and have taken it down.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add something on the historic urban landscape recommendation, but then I realized that it was already there, so it's fine. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, it's it's nice to double check. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments in this preamble? Sheridan, do you want to? It's got to be close to nighttime with you, Sheridan. You're having a late one in Sydney.
It's very late. Look, it's just a suggestion. I see there's a reference there in paragraph 3. It says ICOMOS 20th century architecture. I suspect that's actually the Madrid New Delhi document, and it's correct title. I've just popped in there. I'm guessing that's what it is. And perhaps of relevance or for consideration would be that there was a lot of time spent in coming to terms with some of the definitions that we were using, and some of the terms that we found meant one thing in one part, meant something different in another. And so unifying the terms and trying to get some international definitions was quite a challenge. And I just offer that to you as perhaps a source that might be useful to mine if you want to have a look at those. So the title of the document is Approaches to the Conservation of 20th Century Cultural Heritage. Thank you and congratulations. I think this is a really exciting document.
Thanks so much, Sheridan. That's a really important contribution. Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for, it'll save a lot of time in the long run if you're working hard now. Thanks. Any other questions people wanted to raise on this preamble before we go on to the guts of the document on the second page? Okay, Mike, when you're ready and you've done that, we can move to the...
So do we need to pluralize here as well identities and meanings, or identity and meaning? Do we, what are the implications for?
It's, it would seem to make sense because the next bullet is also plural. Let's try and be consistent.
Any comments on the identities and meanings? Any things that need additions, subtractions on number 1 and the 4 bullets that are there? Olga, I saw a flash of your hand and then it disappeared, and then Shahid.
Yeah, what I like about this paragraph, I'll go with what I like first and I can talk later maybe, is it's vague enough for me to be able to interpret this in any particular direction that I want. So dichotomies, oppositions, and contradictions are something that I work with all the time. But what is important is that it questions the opposition between tradition and modernity, and you want to get rid of that, including urban, rural, old, new. And so that's the one part of or subclause of one that I like, and so I'm okay with the clause itself.
Olga?
Well, I have to say that reading this first point, I was just imagining how I would translate it into French, and I just shook my head. Because the text is so dense, so perfectly, danced in English that, yeah, it would need a lot of meticulous work to translate it to other languages to really
Yes.
capture the essence.
Yes.
Well, that's quite interesting. So would that also work in French? That it would require meticulous, translation back to English. But anyway, that's a minor thing. Do we have other comments? Other, particularly the substance and the meaning? What is trying? What this first section is trying to convey? Does that resonate in terms of our experiences, the discussions we were having, and what we, at the end of the day, would like to see as reflected as as a statement in terms of aspiration or inspiration, as Mike would say? If not, can we move to point number 2 then, ruptures and continuities?
One thing I was going to say, not specifically about number 2 or 1, is as someone who's been involved in the compilation of this document, it's really helpful. I don't know how many people, we have 40 people in the room now, just have 40 pairs of eyes on this document to be able to see it from their own perspectives, and to having, obviously, most of you have presented over the last 2 days, to read these statements and think, well, does that resonate with what I've been talking about? And is there a disconnection between what we're saying here and what you interpret? Because us as people who've been involved with this for a long time probably take a lot of these statements for granted now, and it's hard to see them perhaps in the way that many people would who are fairly new to it. So it's really important that you teach us to be able to see this with fresh eyes. So please don't hesitate to comment.
Just maybe one more comment, if I may say. I assume in a way that before that section 2 components, the potential statement of, that meta-narrative that we will still be discussing will precede it, right? Because if we just start with the terms modern modernity and then we use the term modern heritage, that already creates a tension of, okay, but what do you really understand? So I assume that if we include that paragraph, it would precede really that section.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess maybe we can discuss that when we get to that paragraph as to whether it's incorporated into one or several of these subcomponents, or it's a standalone paragraph as a sort of contextualizing. So
yeah, I think Olga's point is important because we have modern heritage, modern heritage, modern heritage, modern heritage, modern heritage, modern heritage. So
yep.
It's an important point.
Shahid, is that a historic hand? Sorry.
Oh, yes, it's a historic hand.
No, you can go for it again. No problem.
No, I'm trying to think through when we use the term modern heritage in that first paragraph. What are we referring to? Are we say modern heritage as a collective, or are we referring to as a collective noun of the different heritages of the world, or are we talking much more specifically, in which case we would have to pluralize it?
I think we speak as a category, so that would be
Yeah.
singular.
Yeah. Then I'm okay with that. I mean, that's how I understood it. So I'm okay with that. It's a category,
Yeah.
modern heritage.
I think the question here is, I think it was Mohammed Juma just at the beginning of today. He was all the time referring to modern heritage of Africa, that this document will stipulate in a way what modern heritage of Africa contains. And I think that there was, I'm not sure from the emails, that there was a question or a comment about the globality, that it would be a Cape Town document, but it would not only reflect African heritage or heritage, modern heritage of Africa. So I think we are not very specific in here. Only in the first sentence actually says something about Africa and its impact. But it does not, it's not stipulated anywhere from the start whether we're actually speaking about modern heritage of Africa, or we are trying to frame the whole category of modern heritage.
In this section, it's the latter. Yeah, and that was, it was Mohammed who made that point quite clear in last year's workshops, that as a document that will be, obviously, we want it to be ratified and or acknowledged by UNESCO and taken on board by practitioners globally. This section 2 needs to speak to anybody anywhere who feels the same grievances perhaps that people do in this forum about being marginalized, overlooked, and by obviously the historic inequalities of a Eurocentric approach. So the section 2 needed to be speaking to a global and not referencing anything specifically cultural, geographic, continental, etc.
Edward, if I can just, Shadreck, if I can just come in, it's Laura. I think that's really important, because if we're using NARA as a sort of baseline and moving on and forwards, I mean, NARA speaks universally as well. It's not just Japanese. So we're taking that as a lead. So it shouldn't be too specific in that sense.
Thanks, Laura. I mean, the other point that was made in terms of terminology as well, whether we like it or not, there is a common understanding within UNESCO of what modern heritage means. And it is a term that has been used in multiple other documents, as well as the Modern Heritage Programme or the Programme on Modern Heritage. So we have to accept that genealogy and deal with it in the way that we wish to, whether it's like critiquing it or openly, explicitly challenging it. But these are terms that are accepted by the vast majority of people, whether they're from UNESCO or Europe, North America, or the global south or elsewhere, which presents a challenge and perhaps contradiction.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. Is it we focus on modern heritage? What about the modernity and modernism, meaning that every single is the point of modern heritage, right?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Nick? Every what is part of modern heritage?
Sorry. Actually, the component for section 2. The title, the subtitle is Identities and Meanings. So start with point 1, the bullet 1, the terms modern, modernity, and modernism are. Okay, meaning that 3. So finally, all with modern heritage, modern heritage, modern heritage. Very good, but to me, we want to proceed with modern heritage, and then which one is come first? Is it embodies or derive, and then bears testimony? It's very important to make it sequence. I'm not the expert one, but to me, highlight the way you highlight. I know you you understand what I'm trying to say. Thank you, thank you. Okay, thank you. That's it. Thank you.
That's why we have Mike on board, and he's paid extremely highly for that job. $1 a year, isn't it, Mike?
I'm sorry.
The Bitcoin transfer is taking place as we speak.
That has answered your question, Nick, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, should we move on down to ruptures and continuities? Anyone want to add anything? Expanding definitions. So this comes back to the point I've just made about we've been asked to acknowledge the taxonomy of modern heritage that already exists, but I think we do. It's a question of maybe how radical we intend to be, how far we push this. We acknowledge what exists, what has been done under this name, under this label, but we seek also to expand those definitions. Some people might feel that we need to go maybe a bit further than that. So welcome your thoughts.
Do we add the interaction of different linguistic and cultural systems, I mean, I would prefer, say, we embody the interaction of historically different linguistic and cultural systems, just so that we don't get into understanding these as kind of singular, unchanging systems. So yeah.
I would add somehow to that that sense of space and time, because the colonization, it was the colonization of space and time. That's where the rupture actually happened. So somehow to acknowledge that would also mean, you know, the recognition of that it's not just a linear time that exists.
Yes, exactly.
Where am I supposed to?
Yeah. So a formulation might be historical, instead of historic, but historical spatial, social and linguistic systems, something along those lines.
I mean, we do talk about temporal disruption in the second bullet in this section.
Yeah.
Better, I think so. Sorry to interrupt.
That bullet in yellow, we lost the cultural, and the economic also does not feature. And I acknowledge that it might be repetition because these are points that are covered. So this the same point, yeah. Modern heritage embodies the interaction of historical, spatial, and temporal. The culture is no longer there, as originally formulated by Ola, and also we are not seeing any of the economic, but it is one of the variables that drive most of these things.
Yeah, I think that has to be back in there. So it's historical I would want to put it slightly differently. I would say modern heritage embodies the interaction of historical, spatial, socio-cultural, and temporal systems, often bearing testimony to their ruptures caused by external political, economic factors, maybe. Yeah.
I would suggest maybe to simplify it, because spatial, temporal, and really linguistic systems are part of sociocultural systems. So can we just maybe say embodies the interaction of historical, sociocultural, in the brackets, spatial, temporal, and linguistic, and others we can even add, because there are obviously others.
Yeah.
Systems. So we just stipulate those in the brackets, but it's basically historical, sociocultural systems.
Yeah.
Historical, sociocultural systems in the brackets, spatial, temporal, linguistic. Historical, sociocultural systems.
The interaction of social and socio. It's an interaction.
Now, Mike, just take out the word "and." So historical, sociocultural systems, and spatial, temporal, spatial. No, that will be in brackets. The spatial will be in brackets. So that's an example of what we mean.
I don't like brackets in documents like this.
Okay. No, I agree.
But we need to add somehow linguistic.
You can put another hyphen and say sociocultural. It's a.
For anyone in the audience who's not been to a UNESCO committee session, welcome to the type of thing you spend days dealing with.
Oh, yeah.
It's not normally the best thing to manage something like this, so we should move faster.
Yes.
We have to leave to the editing group of Edward, Shadreck, and Laura to they'll dot the I's and cross the T's.
But
and
for now then, Mike, if you can put those words into a bracket, we won't have brackets at the end. And then let's go on to expanding definitions. What does seem heartening from the discussions we've had in the reporting groups is that there's a lot of confirmation of the types of themes that people have been discussing. Coming up again and again, we're not finding too many entirely new themes. Everyone okay with expanding definitions?
I'm not sure what the meaning of the word ephemeral has in that sentence. So it goes, the definitions of blah, 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 that are ephemeral and intangible. I mean, there might be, if I had just glanced at this and I said something was ephemeral, I would have thinking of it as something that is in passing, which is, I guess, not what we are trying to say there. And I would probably want to say that are fluid and intangible.
Can I ask? Hi, can I ask question here?
Please do. Nick.
Yes, why the definition of modern heritage as a second point? I think better first, and then followed by there is need for transcultural, and followed by, because once we start with definition and meaning, and point 1 to point 4, we follow every single thing from point 1, and then the rest for the like this expanding, and follow the point 2 from point number 1, the definition and meaning, and so on. I think it's more clear. Okay, let's see number 1, and then number 2 also repeat for number 1. It is can see the sequence to me, and this is very nice one. But my my truly comment is repeat the point 1. If we have everything is here, but the sequence, meaning that the point 1 of number 1, the point 2 of number 1, and the 3 number 1, point number 1 repeating. I mean the upgrading from the definition, and then stop at the point, unless we have a supporting point. And then one thing down there, number 4, sorry, number 3.4, number 3. Okay, I just asked, let's say this one, am I missing the intangible? What about the tangible? Okay, that's my question. What we thinking about intangible, and what regarding the tangible missing, or we ignore the tangible one?
I think it was a response originally to the dominance of the tangible in the discussions that were being had. So that was put on as an acknowledgement of the intangible. So it's interesting, if you're reading that as maybe overlooking the tangible, we should say modern heritage embodies and promotes not only the tangible, but also the intangible lived experiences, or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's related.
It's assuming, it's making an assumption. You're right.
Okay. I think as I mentioned earlier at work and all, again from point 1, point 2, sorry, the subtitle 1, 2, 3, and so on. But the point 1 for 1, point 2 for 2, followed by meaning that this we can see the sequence, and the I think this is good documentation actually. Thank you.
Well,
that's
thank
my okay.
Thank you.
Is that proposing therefore to take all of 3 and make it 2?
Sorry?
Is the proposal then also to take all of 3, expanding definitions, and put it instead of after identities and meanings? Was that also your meaning?
Meaning that number 1, let's say number 1, the number 1, or number 2, or number 3, but the point of number 3, let's say I just give my idea about the modern heritage need to be definition is to be point 1, because I can see the point is there, but the sequence we just put the point there, but it's not in the flow. That's it. I think Edward can understand me, or I explain. Yeah.
Bullet point 2, Mike, needs to be at the top, not number 2. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, I prefer the modern heritage to be point number 1 for 3, for number 3. Yes, for the expanding definition. Yes. Then followed by, because if we repeat the definition, the second one, and the third one expanding, the bullet 1, the first bullet, every single bullet or point referring the number 1, number 2, number just follow. Yeah. I think make it the point better rather than the point when try to discuss. To me, a little bit confused. Let's say 3A, 3B, 3C. 1A referring to A, 3A, and so on. If I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay.
There's no right or wrong. It's great to discuss it.
Okay.
Thank you.
There is a comment in the chat from Karen Amanding. Under definitions of modern heritage, should we not include acts of creating, making?
Karen, where do you want us to put that? Oh, I see there. Okay.
Yeah, Shahid, I just, you know, obviously where I'm coming from, but it's just, to me, those definitions more include things like oral traditions and so on. And there's this artisanal heritage, which I feel is quite important to also acknowledge and support. I'm not sure whether I've got the correct wording there, but something like that. Acknowledging craftsmanship as a cultural, an expression of cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage, I think is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking of acts of creation, but that has these biblical connotations, which...
What about creative practices after local traditions? So acknowledge the local traditions, creative practices.
Yeah, I think that works better. Creative practices, including craftsmanship, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe artisanship is another way of putting it. My son is studying blacksmithing in Germany, and it's actually a registered artisanal heritage. It's a heritage craft, and yeah.
Well, I mean, it is interesting the way the word artisanal has, or artisanship has changed from the Industrial Revolution to now. So if you were an artisan during the Industrial Revolution, you'd have to serve in a kind of internship before you could call yourself anything. And so, yeah, and as in all of these kinds of craftsmanship or tool making, there are all kinds of hoops that people have to jump through before they can actually call themselves that. An early form of certification, I guess.
Artisanal is less gendered than craftsman.
Yeah, I would go with artisanal or artisanalmanship, artisanalship.
Alisa, you.
Yes, I was wondering if we could not also add the notion of ordinary with craftsmanship and all this, the ordinary lives, the ordinary heritage, because I think it was mentioned a lot also during our discussions, and I don't find it in the document. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a suggestion as to where that might or should be emphasized or referenced?
Maybe with everything related to local traditions, craftsmanships. Maybe we could add a mention of the ordinary. I don't know exactly how to call it.
The everyday.
The everyday, ordinary.
Well, you could put between local and tradition in that second sub clause. Ordinary, everyday traditions.
I don't think it's necessarily traditions, because it could also be just practices, contemporary practices, but that comes from the everyday lives of ordinary people, kind of. I don't know if you understand what
I know
I'm
exactly what you mean. I'm
against
using the word tradition altogether. but that would be a big ask, I'm sure. So I'm happy to talk about everyday experiences, everyday practices, more than traditions.
Yeah, I think here it's fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Diversity and complexity. I'm conscious we should move on. We have a paragraph that Olga and Shahid would like to discuss at the end. Shadreck, we talked of the layered, we were questioning that when we in the top of diversity and complexity.
I don't think it's just, yeah, it's complex. It has multiple, because there was the issue of stratification and then with the layers, that's why I was talking about it. But both the bullet point number 2, modern heritage recognizes the diversity of local and traditional knowledges. Traditional. Is there a better word for that? Contemporary might not, might not be it, but why only traditional? And when modern heritage is met every day, the point which Alisa was talking about.
I'm happy for traditional to be replaced with everyday knowledges, because yeah,
I agree.
And even at to go back to your point about layered, because modern heritage is layered and contested as well. So it's not. So the idea that it's layered and hierarchical and stratified also means
there's a big question about, I mean, Shadreck comes from archaeology, so he has everything layered.
It's true. It doesn't rest easily with me as a
it's not as simple as that. So whether it is contested or whether it comes into the continuity.
Do we have any other disciplines in the room that would contest layered or suggest something alternative?
The whole idea was that there was the issue of stratification. So what I was trying to say is that that stratification is complex, right?
Yes.
And layers, remember, layers are not necessarily linear. They can be in different, they can be in a different multidimensional and in different orientations. So Edward, you deal with you deal with the representing space, you know. so it's that kind of something like this then. But the idea that and also is cumulative. That's the other thing, that modern heritage is cumulative. If we are talking about the that is not just the present.
I would suggest, with regards to local and everyday knowledges, because we're speaking about diversity, so diversity already shows or includes multiplicity. So maybe I would suggest diversity of local and popular knowledge. Popular as going against the imperial or the national, the so-called the truth. Because I don't understand how the local is, why is it local and everyday? How is local somehow,
I would, I mean, The thing about local is it often is then associated with community, and then that gets associated with spatial boundaries. Whereas everyday knowledge is just is a little bit allows for a little bit more interpretation, because the everyday knowledges of how you make iron tools might be spread over a wide area, and it's not localized in any particular sense.
We have quite a few contributions in the chat that would be good to catch up with. Adekunle, you've talked of the vernacular instead of the traditional. Does anyone, would you like to speak more on that, or anyone have any comments on the vernacular?
I'm against vernacular.
I'm also against vernacular. Because the moment you say vernacular, you want to then say, so what is the opposite of vernacular? And then immediately you will say that is modern or contemporary or something like that. And then you set up, the minute you do that, you're going to set up a binary of then and now, modern and tradition, rural, urban. So rural will always be vernacular, and then you have a problem, because one of the issues that I've been talking about is that rural is not unchanging, vernacular, traditional, and so on. In fact, it's sometimes quite the opposite. So
Stella suggests inexpert or not expert.
Well, hence I suggested popular, because as you probably already noticed, words are very important to me. So popular, I actually take this notion of popular culture from the decolonial scholars, who actually say that popular culture is the key moment for cultural liberation, because it is opposed to the imperial, the enlightened one. So hence my suggestion of popular.
I think we have to find a balance between accepted universal terms and
she
how
probably is down there, isn't she?
Annie, is it? Carry on, Mike.
No, sorry. I think we have to, I mean, if we were to use the word traditional, we would not be creating a lot of problems. When we start using vernacular, we would be entering sort of like problems. So as you said, translating into the French and translating to other languages, it is really very critical. So I think that popular is a new term in the way we use it. So therefore we have to be careful about where we would to put it. I'm not saying against it, but we're introducing something which up till now is not considered exactly, shall we say, a positive aspect of it.
And it also has the imperial connotations, actually, in the sense that if you talk of pop culture, that's the, and then particularly the dominance of American or Hollywood, for example. that's. But anyway, we need to move on because the clock is ticking.
So where we've wanted to put in. Stella had asked about differentiate between diversity, plurality, multiple influences that are assimilated or fused into a heritage.
Can I interrupt? Can we use the universal?
Sorry?
Can we use local and universal knowledge? I think rather than we put the traditional, meaning that you mentioned earlier, Michael.
You're looking at this?
Yes, the point, yeah.
I think we're trying to stay away from anything that would be universal.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we try to look something synonym or more upgrade or more I'm maybe not good in English, but I try my best to find out what is the best rather than put the traditional, the vernacular. It could be contemporary, and if the universal is part of those quite big. Maybe we should try make it in document, short and precise, but make use to for 10 to 20 years, maybe. Thank you.
May I suggest that we just highlight local and everyday knowledges at the moment, and then if we come up with something new, you know, we can always change it and then we can move on, because this is just a sort of like a terminology issue now.
Local and everyday can easily be replaced with contemporary knowledges, and that captures whether it's local or something more than local.
Stella, did you want to speak to your point about diversity, plurality, and multiple influences?
I don't know if it's the right place, but I think there's a difference between diversity that distinguishes one from another and diverse multiple influences in a specific heritage that has fused, that has become a new heritage from multiple influences. I think there's a tendency sometimes to bound meaning around a heritage object and give it a singular origin, whereas it could have multiple origins. I don't know if it's the right place to bring that in here.
Thank you again. Maybe we can just, Mike, can you put a note on that? We're going to be sharing, we're going to be saving the chat obviously as well, so it's really vital that any comments you make are recorded in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so we have a definition of the vernacular. Thank you, Karen. I'm not sure if we'll ever get an absolute definition. Thank you. Okay.
So it's a Western thing.
Thanks, Mike. And when you're done with that, on to 5. We're nearly done, folks. Thank you. Sustainability and equity.
What do we mean by components? Are we speaking about dimensions of modernity, or what do we mean by components of modern heritage?
I think it was felt that not all modern heritage was exploitative or based on inequitable practices. So it was just making reference to elements of part, yeah.
Well, I would question that idea, considering that the whole modernity, there is no, as I said, there is no modernity without coloniality. So, yeah.
Well, for me, the problem with modernity as it arises out of the way it is assembled in Europe from a number of different elements, different parts of the world, is that there's which is of course always problematic, because it's inherent in the way in which some things are aspirational about equality, justice, and so on. But behind that is the dark side, which is you define certain humans as not humans, and therefore you can enslave them. And it's this problem that we have to deal with. So you say some components, and then, you know, I mean, it of course leaves a lot about what are we referring to. So and here again, it's about how we use the language to actually convey this idea of on the one hand proclaiming justice, and on the other hand engaging in its exact opposite, you know, being exploitative. Locke and that whole coterie of people that talked about early human rights and contracts between the state and its subjects are engaged in this very project of how to get around this question of not being or not appearing to be exploitative, but doing exactly that, and proclaiming justice, but not doing it.
I also think that this is very problematic, this statement that there is a need for it to be redressed in the protection, restitution, because if we, for example, what does it really mean? Are we encouraging, you know, for people, I mean, if you look at national parks, they were all created through on the land stolen from the people. So now you're saying that, okay, they should be closed and the land returned to people, or how do you expect now, or redressed by countries paying those people? I mean, like, we're suggesting something, and if we suggest something, we need to be sure what we're really suggesting.
But the example you are using in terms of national parks, there are multiple ways of redress. So, for example, the Kruger National Park, one of the ways in which redress is being taken forward is those co-management agreements, and ensuring that there is equal benefit in terms of that. Whether that is adequate or not, but that's another question. But the issue is that there's redress, which is ongoing.
Yes, I'm aware of Kruger National Park issue, but I'm also aware from, for example, about Ngorongoro, what's happening there still. So I'm just, yeah, I mean, I think that issue, especially since it's connected to land, and land is heritage as well, is important. I'm just cautious about how we frame it.
I don't have a problem with the word redress, because, I mean, it's not just land. There's a whole long thing about redress and restitution. It's going to be, certainly redress and restitution is going to be the major issue, or one of the major issues in terms of heritage over the next decade or so. But what we don't, and I think it has to be mentioned here, particularly if you want state parties from the global south to be able to buy into this. The real issue is as Shadreck indicated, you know, there are different ways in which redress, in which restitution takes place. Kruger National Park is one way in which this is being done. I mean, there are other ways in which this could also be addressed. Well, bottom line is we must leave it vague, because those are mechanics rather than principle. So the principle of redress must be there. But
I was going to speak to the point of modern heritage being part of coloniality. I don't, it depends, I suppose, on how you define coloniality, but what of territories around the world which were not colonized or part of the colonial enterprise? I'm thinking specifically of China, for example, where elements of it were, but most of the territory were not. And there's abundant modern heritage there that wasn't necessarily part of the colonial enterprise.
Yes, Edward. So you are speaking actually to the transmodern heritage now. So that's where, you know, that problem with saying modern heritage and what it actually means. Some components of modern heritage, but we are saying that, of the new reformulation, basically, of modern heritage. When I read some components of modern heritage, I think about how it is conceptualized now. So hence, I think maybe if we say, for example, some components of heritage of, but we don't want to put timelines, so we cannot say of, or maybe contemporary heritage or something like that, so that we don't use modern heritage here without really saying what it is, because that's where my problem lies. Can we, is it possible to say contemporary in this particular instance?
Mike, could you highlight the modern there? And we can come back to that. Sorry, some components of
modern heritage.
In the fourth word of that bullet. Thank you.
Appropriated might also raise other meanings, because it implies a power imbalance, because you are appropriating. So there's some with power and there are those without power. And in heritage, it's mostly the communities, going back to that talk of authorized and unauthorized and so on. So that would not really solve the problem, but at least it's highlighted. We can think through it.
Yes, I agree. The first question would be with compensation or without compensation. So I do think that redress is actually a good word, because it has a specific meaning with regards to heritage. It's probably just how we use it in that sentence. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the word redress. It's addressing a principle that something needs to be done to address the problem of having taken something for nothing, or in an exploitative or unequal practice. And so, if you recognize that, what are you going to do about it? So the question of redress it's a principle, not a mechanism.
Yes, it has a social justice component in it, so it's very important.
Sheridan has a comment. There's strength in this text that it is consistently about attributes of modern heritage, but not referencing place site directly, as per your definition. A comment about the coverage of this document. Do you think that since each region has different historical experiences, then attributes will vary? Certainly, that was also the thinking.
Yes.
I was just thinking that those statements might be useful in there.
Yeah,
in the conversations and the comments that have been made as you've been editing, there's been an acceptance that it is about Africa, but that it applies everywhere. So perhaps a statement that is, that other regions will have other experiences might be useful.
I think that one of the points that we were trying to say is, in fact, I would really like to even put it up front, is that we're challenging this idea of comparative analysis. In other words, we are comparing the worlds to a Eurocentric origin, as opposed to developing in the operational guidelines, geocultural groupings and biogeographic provinces, according to IUCN. So each one, I think, so therefore that strengthens what Sherry is saying, is that, yes, we're looking for geocultural groupings and we want everybody to come up with their geocultural groupings as built into the operational guidelines.
I also believe that the meta-narrative paragraph that we still want to discuss will address that, because it speaks to basically non-European societies. So very broad.
We also have a comment from Karen. Thank you. Do you want to elaborate, Karen?
I'm trying to ascertain whether some of it has not already been said.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah.
That's fine. You know, we can take the comment and dwell on it more fully later on. It's
I mean,
great.
it is mentioned here under modern heritage practices, recognize the intrinsic connection between environmental and cultural sustainability and human rights. Yeah, so I mean, the cultural aspect of certain traditional knowledge practices have led to sustainable interactions with the environment. And I think it's important that that is acknowledged, especially in the African context where I'm also an architect, so the way that we build is often not, it's not lasting, it's not durable, but actually because of that, it is sustainable, as opposed to
I think that we have to be careful that we're not doing a document on sustainable development. And I think that this is essentially about modern heritage, about reconceptualizing this understanding in a wider way. I think that if we start going too much into to exactly traditional knowledges, we're talking about traditional knowledges in developing an understanding of modern heritage. We're not talking about it within a wider context, otherwise we'll get completely confused.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe we can just scrap that thought.
Do we reach the final one, point 6, before?
I still have something to 5, sorry. Point 3, I would suggest to speak here about sustainable development as a paradigm or as a framework rather than UN Sustainable Development Goals. And then I have to admit, I'm not sure what bullet 2, what are modern heritage practices? Are we speaking about intangible now? And what is what does the sentence really mean? Modern heritage practice globally ensuring its durability. Is it the durability of the practices or the application of? I'm not sure what this is all about.
It was those engaged in modern heritage, whether it's conservators, theorists, historians, engaged in protecting modern heritage to ensure the durability, resilience, and sustainability of the heritage asset, whatever that might be.
No, I'm speaking about bullet 2.5.
Yeah. So the modern heritage practices are those practices, anyone engaged in the practice of protecting, promoting modern heritage. So as I say, it could be conservators.
Well, you could say conserving.
Yeah, there is something missing.
Modern heritage conservation practices.
Yeah. Well, there might. It's not. Yeah. It's not aimed only at conservation.
Yeah. So it can be, I don't know, like identification, documentation, preservation. I'm not sure, but heritage practices is not clear for me. And then if it's practices in plural, then it's going to be globally ensuring their durability, if I understand correctly.
The durability, resilience, and sustainability of the heritage asset, not of the practices.
Okay, so then not its, but durability, resilience. Yeah, then it needs to be at the end, heritage asset, because it's also not clear. Right? Am I correct? Ensuring durability, resilience, and sustainability of the heritage asset.
Yeah. If people are okay with heritage asset.
Oh, what was this?
Oh, heritage assets, yeah, okay.
So you're moving away from attributes to assets. I think one of the strengths is you've talked about assets or attributes all the way through.
That's a good point, Sheridan. Yeah, I'd go with attribute. Yeah, I prefer that. Certainly, I don't like asset.
But then assets with regards to UNESCO World Heritage List has a very attribute, not asset, has a very specific meaning. So which is different from assets. So maybe heritage assets and attributes or values, because attribute is connected to values, right? So there are two different things.
Or perhaps we just leave it like this.
Yeah, but then its is not, I don't understand what is its then.
If you highlight its, Mike, I'll remember what the question is there.
Its needs a subject.
Yeah.
So it's the practices. Okay.
Is the focus on the practices or the durability of heritage?
Heritage, which I think is referring probably to bullet point 1 when it speaks of modern heritage.
Then we can just say ensuring heritage durability, resilience, and sustainability.
Yeah, if you put that in for now, Mike, we can refine it. I'm conscious of the time. And Shadreck has to leave soon as well.
Well, may I suggest that, I mean, we've got just a little bit left, and if people would want to send their comments in, and then we can take it from there so that we can move on to the next item.
Would you like to share that paragraph, Shahid? Are you, is that
it's
useful for you?
Yeah. Oh, it's not sharing. Okay. It's asking me to launch the meeting. Which is weird. Is it possible for Jacques just to share that, because something's gone horribly
We can
wrong.
see it now. I can see it.
Okay.
You just need to make the window slightly larger so that we can read it.
Yeah. I don't know why my view suddenly shrunk in doing that.
So the intention is this will be a paragraph, a sort of contextual meta-narrative before the 6 sections, or section, sort of an introduction to section 2 preceding the 6 sections. And this was formulated after the deliberations yesterday, for those of you unaware. And particularly coming out of Ola and Olga's presentations.
Maybe Shahid could read it aloud because it's not clearly visible.
No.
Yeah, and I've lost. It's not visible to me on my side, and I'm not sure what has happened to my view. But let me read it out.
Okay.
The idea of modernity as the pinnacle of a socio-cultural progressive transformation has been typically linked to the rapid rise of Europe, starting with the Reformation and the Enlightenment, but enabled by capital accumulation as a consequence of colonialism. Yet, many non-European societies, states, and empires in the history of humanity have made extraordinary advances in terms of social organization, technological innovation, economic and political systems, as well as in relation to ethics and philosophy, both within their own constantly shifting boundaries and across their varied socioeconomic networks and political relations. Western modernity, constitutive of conflict, rupture, and disruption, represents a perspective restricted to a particular discourse and values. As a future transmodernity, it becomes inclusive of traditions distinct from the Western modern, offering cultural liberation free from colonial entanglement.
Sorry, Shahid, if you stop sharing, I can actually share it so that it's larger as well.
I think I'm going to have to exit and then come back because something's horribly gone wrong with my... I can see the pictures of everybody and nothing else.
Because it shows that you're still sharing.
Okay.
And I can't share over you.
It's... Okay.
Oh, that's better.
Okay. Is that better? Okay.
Can I take it down now?
I think you can keep it up.
Okay, I'll keep it up.
Shahid, what's your, your main question to the group?
So, yeah, I'm trying to remember what the debate was about yesterday. So I was concerned that we don't lose the idea that there are very distinct periods of transition, and that each of these have very distinct outcomes for modernity. The second point is, of course, modernity is not specific to Europe. So these turning points, particularly European colonialism, has had a very major impact on what we understand as the globe today. So, and this is the point of all of this. One, this is not a specifically European-centric idea of modernity. So we want to be able to foreground that. Secondly, we do want to say that, of course, the last 500 years have been have had a particular effect on the entire world. But at the same time, there are very different ways in which people have responded to this question of modernity. And so it's to capture this idea. Otherwise, everything gets centered and referenced from Europe over the last 500 years. But there are things which have happened over thousands of years which have nothing to do with Europe specifically. Olga?
Yeah, what I can add is that I'm going back sort of to the question that ended in a way my presentation yesterday, which master narrative or meta narrative are we really questioning? So the issue is that we stop questioning the meta narrative, that modernity is linked to Europe. because both UNESCO document on identification and documentation of modern heritage and the Getty Conservation Institute document from this year, they actually leave space for the so-called multiple modernities. They recognize them, but they never question what modern heritage or modernity is. The conceptualization of modern heritage is not put under discussion. What is interesting is that, for example, the Getty Institute document, which we reference in Cape Town document, recognizes upfront a Western bias to the discussions and to the terminologies used. But it says that it invites readers to interpret the themes and apply them to their own histories. Now, the question is, what if those histories do not fit that particular framework? So what we are trying to create in here is a new, broader framework that, as Shahid said, on the one side, recognizes that contentious past and the troubled origins of modernity, but in the same time tries to assume the so-called positive moments of Western modernity, being open to the dialogue with other cultures. While recognizing, those disruptions and conflicts, the so-called dark side of modernity, this document is supposed to be future-oriented, and it's supposed to carry hope and offer promise of liberation, which I explained yesterday, what it means really for the non-Western countries. And also recognize that there are different epistemologies, that the world is really diverse or pluriverse. Then that paragraph also mentions barrier networks and movements with reference to within the continent, and this is with reference to what Professor Uduku yesterday mentioned, that these networks and that movement is still there on the continent, even if it was ruptured by the Berlin Conference. So there's really a lot of our discussions from yesterday packed in that small paragraph.
Thank you, Olga. Mike, your hand's raised.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that when we had the workshop with the Getty, we came to a stumbling block because if I look at the operation guideline, it speaks about themes, not just themes, but also regions and the geocultural groupings and biogeographic provinces. In other words, we cannot use themes by themselves. It just doesn't work. And especially when, as you said, Olga, that they came from shall we say, a European context. On the other hand, I think it's very important what Shahid has given a European thing. I don't think it's going to be serving our purpose. And if I was to think about China and their industrial revolution and what they consider modernism, is also sort of like questions exactly where I'd like to put it. I think where we are, as Olga says, we're looking towards a future of which we are saying that modernism is not just simply rooted in the past, but in fact its interest is within developing the future, and that is why the youth were a critical part of it in this idea of aspiration and inspiration. This was my thoughts. It came to me very, very strongly in today's session where we had people in music and art speaking and being having a completely different approach about how they understand, therefore, colonial influences.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone else want to comment on this paragraph? Or we can share it with you for the future. I'm conscious also Shadreck has to leave us soon, unfortunately.
I think it just needs a bit of tweaking, I think, and I just would like to support Olga on futures and some of the other texts that she had mentioned.
And particularly the optimism and hope. I think we have to be giving that sort of signal. It's not laden with pessimism.
I mean, when we were thinking about this yesterday and writing it, I mean, we want to recognize that other non-European societies in their own right have their own history, their own ways of doing with it. But those have been entangled, especially so in the last 500 years, with a colonialism. And it's not one kind of colonialism, it's different kinds. I mean, there are settler states, for example. There are some that were states when were not colonized in the same way. And so even that process is fairly wide open in a way in which to interpret. What we're trying to do here is to say the way that colonialism engaged with the rest of the world was exploitative, but at the same time, aspects of the Enlightenment have become, well, kind of global in a way that one uses the concept of human rights to defend or to ask questions about exploitation. If it wasn't for that, it would not have been possible to ask that. And so we were trying to capture this, if you like, paradox, this contradiction that's inherent in the way in which modernity works. Because, you know, for the point that Olga's making, for every idea that modernity was progressive, there's if you look carefully enough behind it, there's a dark side. So for every time John Locke talks about emancipation or justice or freedom, you point to him having slaves, earning a living from slave plantations in the Americas. So it's this kind of contradictoriness, this paradoxical set of ideas that we want to capture, and this is the myth. Otherwise, all we get is that we have, it's here in South Africa, as Olga will know, there are some politicians who keep on saying colonialism brought, as if it only brought those things. It also brought a lot of other things which were not exactly great. You know, it enslaved people, it exploited people, it took away their land, but at the same time it proclaimed justice and fairness and so on. So this is the contradictoriness of modernity, and we want to capture that and say, okay, but given that, when you look to the future, you want a new phase of history which doesn't repeat those kinds of things again as part of transmodernity. Some people talk about it as post-modernity, but we're never out of modernity until we can fix those things. This is the issue.
Thank you, Shahid. That's really very clear. I'm very conscious of time, and I think we should probably start to wrap up and enter the final brief session, the closing remarks of the day. Does anyone else have anything to say on this point? If not, then I thank you all profoundly for your patience. I know it's not an easy thing, but it's hugely helpful for us. Thank you, Mike, for taking all those notes. It's captured a wealth of information which we'll take on board and continue to refine this document and keep you all updated with its development over the course of the next few months. I'm not sure who to hand over to now. There was due to be a break before the final session. I don't know how everyone is feeling, whether they need to stretch their legs. We have about 20 to 30 minutes of closing remarks from different representatives. So Shahid, Shadreck, how would you like to play that?
I'm happy to simply go straight ahead and conclude the day.
Okay. So the closing remarks there are three components to it. One from the Dean of the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment, my boss, as a welcome really to UCL next year and the development of these conversations in a global frame at UCL. And then reflections by the AWHF. I'm not sure if we've got Jops in the room, or Professor Varissou, and then Shadreck and Shahid to conclude. So I think, Jacques, if you're ready to play Professor Lindner's presentation. Thank you so much, and thank you all for your patience and sticking with it. It's been an incredible 2 days, and only part of the journey. Still a long way to go. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you to the technical team for doing certain wizardry behind the scenes to prepare this short message from the Dean of the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment here at UCL. And it'll be the first of the closing remarks from those that have been instrumental in organizing not just this conference over the last 2 days, but also all the workshops and the enormous amount of time and effort that's gone into planning this occasion and the workshops leading up to it. So thank you to all of you, and also to everyone who presented over the last 2 days. It's a huge contribution to this effort, and all the sessions are recorded, so they'll be on the website. We'll obviously sort through those over the next few days or weeks, and they'll all be on the website as recordings in due course. So anything that you missed, you'll be able to catch up with from the MoHoA website. So it just remains for me to thank everyone once again. Shahid will be taking over after this short message, and thank you to all of you.
And I am the Dean of the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment at University College London. I wish I were able to join you live today, but since I'm not able to, I wanted to record and share this message. And it is a great honor to be invited to address you all at the end of this outstanding conference on the modern heritage of Africa. I'm very aware of the wider aims and objectives of this timely, urgent initiatives, and I applaud you for the contributions you have made in achieving these through your participation in this conference. Today marks the conclusion of a very significant stage in a long process that at its heart sets out to learn from the experiences of Africa in seeking to revisit, reframe, and rethink our relatively recent past to build a better future. It is my profound privilege as the Dean of the Bartlett to be able to invite you all to the next stage in this process a year from now in our follow-up conference hosted by the Bartlett in collaboration with the University of Cape Town, the Africa World Heritage Fund, UNESCO, through the outstanding commitment of the World Heritage Center and many other global partners. And I'm especially pleased that the Bartlett has been able to support modern heritage of Africa over the last year through various workshops and other initiatives which have led up to this Cape Town conference. I've been particularly inspired and uplifted by the energy, the enthusiasm demonstrated by the artists involved in the Swahili pot in Mombasa, whose outstanding performative work has brought a sense of joy to the critical reflections in this conference. Modern heritage of Africa has cast an important light on the inequalities, contradictions, and discriminatory practices that were not only inherent in our varied and collective experiences of the modern, but which also continue through all kinds of legacies of the modern era, from institutional racism to historiographic and disciplinary biases that impact what we learn and how we learn. And so I welcome and applaud the critical self-reflection of partners like UNESCO and the Getty that necessarily precedes and accompanies their support of and solidarity with modern heritage of Africa. And I would like to take this opportunity to affirm the same commitment from the Bartlett. As a faculty with a long history of radical thinking, we too find ourselves facing a moment of reflexivity as we grapple with the confluence of existential issues that have forced us to look critically at ourselves and at our practices, and to recognize the need to change. Many of these issues are already hallmarks of the 21st century, but their roots were formed and nourished in the modern era that modern heritage of Africa is concerned with. And I'm thinking like issues such as the climate crisis, sustainability, racism, identity, and social, spatial, and environmental justice. So as part of our commitment to change and to encourage our students to build a better future, we are really excited and honored to be able to welcome Modern Heritage of Africa to UCL next year. Building on the commitment to learn from Africa and your extraordinary efforts and collective contributions, next year's conference will seek to recast modern heritage in a global frame and in light of the planetary crises we now face. And this will be encapsulated in the presentation of the Cape Town document on modern heritage to UNESCO. A document which seeks to decenter and reframe the conceptualization of modern heritage and the way we ascribe value to the modern. We thoroughly endorse this effort to modify international policy and guidance on modern heritage, and to do so in line with present and future planetary challenges around ecological, social, and economic equity. So it's a privilege for the Bartlett to be part of this initiative, and I once again extend my gratitude to all of you for your outstanding contributions this week and for inviting me to welcome you all to the Bartlett next year. I look forward to seeing you next year, and thank you.
I guess I should follow. There's no particular person that's chairing this last session. So once again, I want to echo many of the closing remarks already made, to thank everyone who has participated in this conference, particularly the presenters. Without your considered views, much of what we have debated, discussed, and contributions to the Cape Town document would not have happened. But I also want to thank the staff of the CMC of UCT and all the people that they have pulled in to make this conference possible. It's an incredible effort to put all this together and to make sure that in the background all of this goes as smoothly as it has. And so really without them, these kinds of interactive Zoom video conferences would just not be possible, right? And in fact would be very, very bland and stilted, and indeed boring. but from what I can see, this has been an extraordinary conference. And it has been very important. The ideas that have been expressed here are path-breaking, forward-looking, and we hope that we have captured the essence or essences of the discussion in the Cape Town document. I think we should also recognize that the Cape Town document is not the final word, and it can still be amended, edited, subject to further research, new evidence, new ideas over the next year before we get to University College London. And so I would sincerely encourage all the participants to become part of MoHoA and to constantly keep an eye on the website. Where and when necessary, we will of course inform everybody that is now on our mailing lists of developments that are taking place. I also want to thank the various senior members of the executive, the University of Cape Town, for supporting this initiative. It ties in well with some of the very important projects that we have on the go, and hope that this will enhance those very important ideas that we are developing. I don't want to spend much more time. It's been a long day, and some of us still have to get back and do some debriefing and prepare for tomorrow. On the question of tomorrow, we will meet again as usual at 10 o'clock, but it's not going to be a very long session. It is essentially to introduce and make known the Cape Town document as something that we have adopted at this conference, and we will be doing that tomorrow. We will hopefully be able to speak to the document, and hopefully the press, but certainly UCT media liaison people will be there. We want to capture this event tomorrow and also turn it into a short video of the launch of the Cape Town document. So I don't think there's anything. Oh, yes. And the last point, I want to reiterate what I said earlier this morning about the conference proceedings being published and the possibility of further publication in much longer and substantial articles in journals and books. We will alert you to these developments as we go along, but certainly the proceedings we will be publishing. So I would urge that everybody writes up their presentations into a 2,500 to 3,000 word text. And if we could have those by the middle of the month, we will shortly give you a specific date on which these should be returned to us, and we will publish them. For those that don't meet that deadline, we will then publish in the same proceedings the abstracts that you have given us, so that there is a complete record of this very important conference that we have had. With that, I want to thank everybody for today's proceedings and wish you all a good evening for now. Thank you.